Today I want to give a sermon on a topic that I think is really fitting with the number of weddings we're having here right now. It's a family sermon. I want to talk about how to have godly children in an ungodly world and give a sermon on raising kids and the importance of it. The answers, by the way, on how to have a godly family, how to have a happy family, are found in the pages of the Bible. This is a very important topic, and God didn't leave us without verses on the topic. He gives us plenty of guidance on how to be good parents and good grandparents. Do we realize the enormous responsibility and importance that God places on us as parents, and I would say grandparents as well, in raising His children? That's right, they're His children, the Bible says. And God has loaned them to us for a certain period of time to help develop for Him. And it's part of our role as parents. God lets us care for His children for just a few years until they mature and move out of our homes. And we've got to take advantage of those years. And we've got to make sure that we're doing our jobs. Go to the second epistle of Paul to the Apostle Timothy. And I want to begin here in chapter 3, verse 1, and look at a section of scriptures that really shows the state of families at the time of the end, the age in which we live. It says in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers." And then he mentions disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such people turn away. It's a great description of the world in which we live, the country in which we live here at the time of the end. They certainly have this form of godliness, but they don't practice what's written in the pages of the Bible. In Isaiah chapter 3 and verse 12, and you don't have to turn there, it simply says, "As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them." Another prophecy in the book of Isaiah, he says, "O my people, those who lead you cause you to err and destroy the way of your paths." And we see that in the world today. We certainly see these prophecies being fulfilled on a grand scale, not just in America, but around the globe. And so it's important in the Church of God that we don't go down that same path with our children, with our families. And if you're a young couple and you're just getting married, hopefully at some point you will be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, right? You'll have some children, and God actually commands you to do so if you're able to. And I'm in a congregation today where people have followed that rule really well. And so way to go. Keep up the good work. But when we look at the job that God gives us as parents with His children, notice what He says in Psalm 127. Psalm 127. And we'll begin with the first verse here. We have a hymn in the hymnal regarding the psalm. And it starts out in verse 1, "Unless the Lord builds a house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain." And that's true with literally building a house, but it's also especially true, as we'll see the context here, in raising children and having strong families. I think all of you have heard the saying that, if you want to have a strong community, you need strong families. And if you have strong communities, then you have a strong nation. And in the church, if we have strong families, we have strong congregations. And if we have strong congregations, we have a strong church. And so it's important that we raise our children in a godly way and that we turn our children to God. There's nothing more important, by the way, as far as your job as a parent, than teaching your children the way of God and that path. I've always told my children, I don't care if you're, a custodian, then just do that well. and you might be very successful. I know people who have businesses in that area and really make great money, and they enjoy their work. I know other people who are doctors in the church. I don't care what you are, whatever you do it well, and God has to come first. So the most important thing is not that you're a brain surgeon, it's that God's first in your life, that you put him first, that you're learning this way of life that you're going to be teaching in the future, and that you should be practicing right now. It says in verse 3, Psalm 127, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb is a reward." So God says that children are a blessing. Now, we live in a world that questions that. We see the number of abortions around the globe is just off the charts. They don't seem to value children very much when we do what we do as a world and as a nation today. You know, people would rather save a tree than prevent an abortion today. It's pathetic that the world has come to this stage, and it's one of the reasons that God is going to destroy America and we're going to go into captivity, is because of the killing of these unborn babies. God says they're a blessing, and he said there's something that he considers a reward. Verse 4, "Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them." So having a lot of children in Old Testament times was a symbol of strength, and particularly in an agricultural economy. I have relatives with large families. I have some second cousins, and their parents, mom and dad, are still married, been married the whole time. They have 18 children, but they had their built-in workforce for the farm. They're farmers, and they just kept having kids, and they had a workforce, and they had a big farm, and they are quite a close family. They're not in the church, but it's amazing. And back in Old Testament times, the extra hands of children increased the productivity of a farmer, right? They really helped out. And even today, I'm really glad that I have my children home because we're moving, and it makes it so much easier with the boys and Josie and Abby. They're packing and carrying more boxes than I do. I appreciate that very much. But what will God's heritage be in your children? Will it be a ruined life in prison, death at the end of a needle, or will it be a productive, successful life? And when they're little, your child's life is in your hands, and God holds you accountable for how you raise those children and what you do. And as a parent, one thing we all have to learn is you have to sacrifice doing your own thing to do the necessary things to positively influence your children. And people who don't do that, who put their job before their family or their wife and children, put other, interest, even entertainment ahead of their family, will suffer consequences down the line because their family will not be successful and healthy as God intended. And so being a parent is being in a role where you have to serve and you have to help and you have to, take care of those children, make sure they have clothing and food and the things they need, and also to make sure that they turn out to be successful in the world, in their jobs, at least guide them in the path. At some point they grow up and have to make their own decisions and work out their own salvation with fear and trembling. But I can tell you this, until my dad died, he corrected me. I could be 50 and it didn't matter. I got a call from Dad if he didn't like something, and I heard about it. And I didn't always like it at the time, but I appreciated it. I'd hang up the phone, I might not be so happy. I tried to be polite, but then I got to thinking about it. Of course, he's right again. I've got things to fix here. I could do that better. But he did that because he cared, and I knew he did it because he cared. And he loved us as children. Now, one of the things when it comes to raising children, people say, well, I don't know how to do this. And it is interesting. When you're a parent, it's like your first time, right? You didn't get a practice run. When you have children, it's like, now they're here and now I got to do this. And I haven't done this before, and I hope I can do it well. And that's why it's good to have parents that you can call and grandparents that you can call, or people that are older than you that have had children that you can talk to and say, what do I do here? I've not done this before. I need some help. You kind of learn on the fly as a parent. And God made it that way, made it that way for a purpose. But God will never give you a job or require you to do something that he doesn't know that you can be successful doing. Like God says, look, I'll give you the help to do this if you will read the Bible and follow the advice that I've given you. If you will stay in a state of prayer and ask me, I'll help you. I can say that I've had to pray many times about how to deal with my children over various things that happened through the years. I had to do that when I was a counselor years ago at camp. God helped me to do this job well. Like, I don't know how to do this, and I have not had a lot of training in this. I want to do this job well. I want these kids to love camp and love God's way of life and stay in the church. Let me have that small impact that I can in a positive way and help me to do that well. And the same thing applies with your children. Sometimes you're at loggerheads. You don't know what to do. That's the time to get on your knees and ask God for a little help. God, I'm stuck. I don't know how to handle this. Help me out. And he will. It's interesting in Joshua 24. Let's go there, Joshua 24. What the scriptures say here, and all of us have heard the name Joshua and know probably the story of, or at least some of the story of Joshua. And many of you, I've been to homes in the church through the years, and even in our own home, when you walk in, right there, as you walk in the front door, you'll see this verse. Joshua 24, verse 14. I'll just start there and give you the flow. It says, Now therefore fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in truth. Put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. He says, And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. And here's the part of the verse that many people have on the wall in their home. I have it in mine. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And that has to be our thinking as parents and grandparents. In this house, we're going to serve the Lord. We're going to do it his way. And as my kids got older and became teens and then young adults, I've always had house rules. And in this house, we do it God's way. And if you don't want to do it God's way, the door swings the other direction. You're welcome to leave. But here, we're going to do it this way because that's the way we should be doing it. Fortunately, my children embrace this and want to do this. And many of you have children who have embraced it. But we've also had, difficult times in the church, and many of you have children that are not in the church any longer. And God saw all the things that happened, and there's certainly responsibility on individuals that perverted or apostatized things. And at the end of the day, hopefully you raise your children well, and maybe at some point they will come back. Maybe there's hope for them. And I think we always need to extend that hope for them and pray for them. You can't back the truck up. Another thing my dad used to tell us quite frequently, you can't back the truck up. Like, once you've done this, you've done it. You got to live with the consequences. If you didn't do it well, you didn't do it well. You got to live with that. But the bottom line is, I have seen many young people come back to the church decades later, and they think back to some good times they had at the Feast of Tabernacles and at camp, and they realize, you know what, Mom and Dad weren't nuts after all. I'm a little older, and I realized they were right. They were just trying to help me, and they come back, and that's the hope we have. That's something we always look forward to, and we see in the Bible the example of the prodigal son, and here's a guy who just went off the rails. Like, he did everything wrong, and he spent all of his inheritance, and he wasted it on hookers and living wildly. The Bible tells us what he wasted the money on. Like, this guy went as far off the rails as you can go. Now, there's always, scars and bruises and hurt and consequences for that. But God can forgive. And in this case, in the prodigal son's case, we see that the father kept looking for the son, and one day he saw in the distance his son. And he ran to greet him and hugged him and embraced him and welcomed him back to the family. And that's what we have to do with our children, if they've chosen a wrong path. What we do not ever want to do is this, you screwed up, I'm not talking to you, I don't forgive you. That stuff's got to go by the wayside. God forgives us, we need to forgive others, especially our own children, if they repent. If they turn their lives around and want back, we need to run to meet them. We need to embrace them. We need to welcome them back. Now, they're going to come back sometimes with some hurts, some baggage, maybe a lot of tattoos and piercings and other things, but they're back, and we'll deal with those things, right? Some of it you might not be able to erase, but they're back. They've learned a lesson, and so we always need to think that way, spiritually with our spiritual brothers and sisters, but also with our children and extended family. So I want to give you 12 points in the time that I have today on how to raise godly children in an ungodly world. And for those who are just married and those who are about to be married, this is for you and for the rest of us, of course. Point number one, and I don't know that you can even put a value on this point. If you want to raise godly children in an ungodly world, be a godly person yourself. Be a godly person yourself. So set the right example for your children to follow. You've heard the saying that who you are speaks so loudly that I can't hear what you're saying. You can't expect your children to listen to your advice and to ignore your example. Your example is very important. And I've even told men who give sermonettes, I think sermonettes and split sermons and things like that are good for the men, because you have to hold yourself to what you teach, right? You get up here and you give a sermon and you say, look, you shouldn't be a liar, you shouldn't bear false witness. And then the first situation you get in where you're tempted to not really tell the whole truth, you go, I just spoke about that. Now, I can't now, follow my own advice. It's kind of a double-edged sword. As a parent, if you don't practice what you preach, if you don't do what you tell your kids to do, you're a hypocrite and they will see right through it. And in my life, I've had a lot of opportunity to work with kids. Gene, who gave the sermonette, Mr. Atkinson here today, also coach and work with kids. And many of you have had opportunities, and a lot of you have your own kids, right? That's a huge, big project right there. But I've learned through the years that young people see hypocrisy really quickly. Maybe quicker than old people, right? They just go, I can't listen to that guy, or I can't take advice from that person because they're a hypocrite. They don't practice what they preach. We see it in politics today. We see it in leaders in our own country. We see the hypocrisy just off the charts, and it's hard to have respect for those people. In fact, I don't. I may have respect for the office, but not for the individual, because they have no character. I have to respect the office. I have to pray for these people, but sometimes what they're saying, they never abide by what they say. They have rules for everybody else that they themselves don't follow. And so you've got to practice what you preach. And it's interesting when you read in Genesis about Abraham and his children and his household. Look what it says in Genesis 18:19. Genesis 18:19, regarding Abraham and his family and his children. And this is God's review of Abraham. He says, "For I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him." You have to ask yourself, I have to ask myself, could God say that about me, or could God say that about you? That you are going to command your children, your household, in such a way that God says, look, I know I'm going to be able to bless this guy because he's going to do it. That's just who Abraham is. I count on that. Abraham demonstrated his faithfulness, and God saw it, and God said, this guy's 100% committed. This guy's all in, to the point of being willing to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. I mean, that's all in. And when God saw that, he smiled. He was happy. He liked that about Abraham, and he will like that about us. In Hebrews 11, verse 17, 18, and 19, God talks about that incident, of Abraham having to be tested. And by the way, God will test us. God doesn't tempt us. Some people use the word tempt. God never tempts us to do evil. Satan does. Society can be tempting to go do the wrong thing, but God will test his people, and he tested Abraham in this matter. And notice what it says in Hebrews 11, verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. Now, you might say, wait, I read the account, and he didn't kill Isaac. But as far as God's concerned, it's as good as done. He was going to do it until God stopped him. He was totally committed to following through. Why? What went through Abraham's mind? Because any of us who have a son, the last thing we want to do is kill that son or sacrifice that son. If God told us to do it, we have to be willing to do it. But look what Abraham was thinking. It tells us here in Hebrews, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be blessed, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. So Abraham said, look, I'll kill him, but God will resurrect him because God promised descendants through him. And that's how much faith I have in God. And once again, today, people who won't sing at church. I mean, are you kidding me? Isaac was his son. He was willing to kill him because he trusted God. God wants us singing praises. Let's sing. What are we thinking when we don't do that? But here is an example of Abraham that we should follow. And Abraham set an example for his children to follow in his obedience to God. And what do we have? Generations. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, because they were taught right and because they listened and followed through themselves, there came a point at which they had to work out their own salvation with fear and trembling. But I bet Abraham was like my dad and many of yours. It didn't end the day you walked out the door and moved out of the home. You're going to hear about this or that or the other thing at a Thanksgiving get-together or a family reunion because they're concerned. They want the best for you. And as parents, we have to do that in balance. We don't want to push our children away, but we have to have that kind of relationship. So as parents, we have to face the fact that if we want our children to turn out right, we must be right. We have to do what we want them to do. We must be what we want our children to become, is another way that you could say that. Our daily life ought to be an example of how God would want a person to live. Number 2, teach your children about God, his laws, and his way of life. That is your number 1 responsibility. In Deuteronomy 6, verses 6 and 7, Deuteronomy 6, most of you who've been in church any period of time have heard this many, many times, but it's as good today as it was the last time you heard it. Deuteronomy 6, verse 6 and 7, and these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently, not just teach them, but teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. In other words, throughout the day, like all the time. Your responsibility doesn't end at noon or 5 p.m. You have a responsibility. It should be a central part of what you do when you have children. And we all know the Word of God is the foundation of knowledge. And it's one of the greatest gifts, this book, the Bible, is one of the greatest gifts that God ever gave us. His laws, his statutes, his judgments, a code to live by. We know right from wrong, good from evil because of the Bible. People in the world no longer know good and evil. If you were to walk into a high school classroom or a college classroom today and say, is homosexuality and the gay, lesbian, transgender lifestyle okay? Or is it sin? How many people would say it's sin? Not very many people. They don't think it's wrong. We're supposed to embrace it, endorse it, go along with it. God calls it what it is. But again, God doesn't hate the sinner. He hates the sin. He goes, look, quit doing that, knock it off, and you'll be happy. Your life will be rich and full. So the message, if you say, look, knock that off, or it's going to cause the downfall of the nation, you're going to be unhappy, you'll never have the kind of life that you could have if you do it the way God says, that's a good message. Now, of course, the world will look at it as hate speech, but it needs to be said. And in the church, we should know it. And we should have the character in situations to say it. And I've known recently, in recent years, 2 times college kids, one of my own daughter, had assignments in their classes in which they had to go against the flow on this very issue and write a paper that says, no, I don't agree. I believe that's not okay. Now, you might not get a real good grade on the paper, right? But at least you're not caving to the pressure. You're saying, I disagree, and here's why. That's what God wants us to do. I get coffee from my wife at Starbucks. She loves Starbucks. So I go over there, I get her coffee. I don't like what the company stands for, but man, that coffee's pretty good. And I go over there, and I get the coffee, and I'm in D.C., and about half the people that work there are homosexual. And one time there was a wedding, but the girl that got married, I know she married a guy. I'm like, I know she's not, so that's cool. She goes, I want you to see my wedding pictures. And she opened all the pictures. She's showing me, and I'm like, wait, there's a guy on the girl's side. Like, what's that about? Sure enough, that's the partner of the other one. And I'm like, yeah, I've seen enough. She goes, what? You don't like that? No, I'm not for that. But, if you don't like that, what if I say, oh, no, I'm fine with that? Well, then I just lied. I denied Christ. I didn't stand up. I'm like, no, I can't do that. That's not okay. And she got it. She actually agreed with me. But she had this person in her wedding because he works at the Starbucks that she works at. God wants us to take a stand on what we believe and not cave to pressure and not just go with the flow. I mean, we see that with Mass today. Everybody's gone with the flow, and you don't have one, man. You're the weirdo. You're going to kill everybody. I'm like, this is ridiculous, but, it's what's happening. I can see how the mark of the beast is going to come in, and people will just go with the flow. They're just going to cave this stuff. Like, what is wrong with people that they don't take a stand on anything anymore? And in the church, we have to say right is right, wrong is wrong. We have these words to live by, and we have to teach our children these things, this way of life. And the Bible calls it the way. The most important thing we can do is help our children to develop a personal relationship with God. And they do that through prayer and study, occasionally fasting. I've always encouraged that with the kids with a tough decision, or maybe they want to apply for a job. Like, a job's a big deal, fast about it. God will give you the right job. It's a big decision. For us to move to Kansas City is worth fasting about. It's a big decision, right? We tried to move to Florida. Tried, put offers in on the house. The doors were all slammed. We go, it doesn't look like God wants us there. Let's try this. It worked. Maybe God wants us here. But it's worth asking. It's worth praying about. It's a pretty big decision. As a parent, you want to make God's way of life relevant to the daily situations that your child faces. Sometimes we get all academic about the Bible, and it's not real. I've had ministers in the past that were pastors. I've been in the church 50 years. They were just boring. I have to say it, just really bad speakers. They didn't really put much time into their messages. And it was kind of a grind to go to church. I know God commands me to be there, I'm going to go, but I know what this is going to be. It's going to be overtime and boring. And a lot of times kids walk out the door after a while. They have that for 10 years, and they get older and they leave the house and they don't come back. You have to counter that as a parent if you find yourself in that situation. You have to make God's life and his way of life relevant, exciting, fun. How do you do that? Well, I know one thing my parents did growing up. On Friday night, we had the best meal of the whole week. And Mom would put the candles out. We were little kids. We got wine. It was awesome. It's a teaspoon, right? It's like a thimble. But everybody had their little glass, and we're having wine with Mom and Dad who have a regular glass, right? But it was special. And there were candles, and it was decorated, and it was the best meal, and it was always dessert, which I still like today. I have too much dessert, but I love dessert, right? The Sabbath was special. We got to sleep in. I grew up in a family that worked a lot. I go to school, I get after school. If I was in sports, I'd do that. I'd come home, I'd eat, we'd go work at the shop till 11. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That was the routine. My dad had his own business. He was a mechanic. He had a shop. At 11, he would shut the lights off and we'd go home, pull the door shut. Most Sundays we worked. But when Friday night came, nobody had to work. Sun is about to set, and we get to rest. And man, it was awesome. It was a great break. But we made that special as a family. We made the holy days special. And the Feast of Tabernacles was the best thing of the year, right? As a young person, it was awesome. And we get to go to cool places. Our first feast was the first year they had it here in the Ozarks, of all places. Right out of the gate. First year we were here, it was awesome. I remember as a kid, we had no money. We had a green 54 Ford. My dad got a good deal on John Deere green paint. He painted the tractor and he painted the car. It stood out from the crowd like you could always find our car in a parking lot. And back then, most of those cars didn't have seat belts, and Dad used to race cars, so he put seat belts in everything he drove because he drove fast. And we'd pass all the church people with our stickers on the bumper going to church, and every now and then a minister would talk to my dad for, what were you doing driving that fast? I was just trying to get where I'm going. But anyway, we would take off, all the way from wherever, Canada, North Dakota, when we lived up there, and drive all the way down to these feast sites. And one year all the way down to Squaw Valley. It was awesome. We have great memories. We stayed usually in the cheapest hotel or cabin that you could get. And we didn't care, man. We were at the feast, and we were, out there with our fishing poles if there was water. And we really enjoyed it and built good memories. But these holy days and the feasts were special, and I can't imagine life without them anymore after being in the church. Can you imagine not having the feasts and the holy days? That's amazing. And those were things that got lost through the centuries that God had to restore to the church through Mr. Armstrong, the holy days and the keeping of those. What about, again, teaching your children to pray and study the Bible? Did you ever do that? When they're little, a good thing to do is get them to kneel down and say their prayers every day. Just get in the habit of that. And you've got to help and teach and guide them in those things. I know even with our kids when they were little, they'd say the same thing. I'm like, can you try like a different sentence tonight? Because you just do the same thing for like a week straight. So they learn, okay, I've got to think outside this little box about something else and begin to become better at it as they went. God says in Proverbs 22:6 that if we train a child in the way he should go, when he is old, he will not depart from it. And so it's important that we teach them right from wrong, good and evil. The world's confused. Our children should never be confused. Number 3, show your children that you love them. Show your children that you love them. It's not enough to just tell them. I could say tell them, but that's not enough. You have to show them that you love them. In Matthew 22, verse 36, Christ was asked a question from a young lawyer. And he said here, look at Matthew 22, verse 36. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Love God with everything you got. That's number 1. That's top priority. And when I'm counseling people for marriage, I tell them, you put your wife or you put your husband before God, you'll have a bad marriage. God has to come first, then your wife or then your husband, and don't put your children in front of your husband or your wife. They come after that in your relationship list of priorities. God number 1 always. And then he says, this is the first and great commandment, verse 39, the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He doesn't say love your neighbor with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. That's God. But love your neighbor as yourself. Treat them like you'd want to be treated, right? The golden rule. And that your neighbor, basically the Bible makes very clear, is all other human beings. They're all potential members of the God family. Some are called now, some are not. Very few now. Like we heard, we're in that first round draft pick, right? We're among the first fruits. And we don't ever want to forget what a blessing that is to be called now and to have an understanding of the truth. But it also is a little more difficult because we have Satan and society to deal with, which people in the millennium and the great white throne judgment period will not. Satan will be locked up, the demons will be bound and out of the picture during that time. So there's more of a challenge, but God also says those in the first resurrection, he calls it a better resurrection. You have a higher responsibility. You have an important calling. So don't screw it up. Like, you have a job. You have a role to play in that. Value that calling. Value the knowledge and the understanding, and pass it on to your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, is what the Bible tells us to do. Number 4, discipline your children. There are people in the world today that don't like that point, and they like to cut that one right out. A lot of psychologists, a lot of the modern child-rearing books do away with that. In fact, some books tell you to reward your kid for bad behavior. It's like, well, that's really screwed up. Where'd you get that from? That's dumb. But they write a whole book about it. What does the Bible say? What does God say? Look at Hebrews 12, verse 5. A lot of times when you read what the world has to write about these kind of topics that are really spiritual in nature, it's the blind leading the blind out there. Don't get caught up in that. Look at what God says. What does the Bible say? He didn't forget about this very important topic and not give us instructions regarding this responsibility. He says in Hebrews 12, verse 5, "And have you forgotten the exhortation on which speaks to you as to sons?" He says, "My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives." So God corrects us. He chastens us. He rebukes us. He says, if you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? If you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. In the King James, it said bastards. And I like that word even better. It gets the point across, right? So God corrects us. We're to correct our children, and we're to do that in love. You know, God absolutely hates, he despises child abuse. It should never happen in the Church of God. It should never happen on the planet, but it happens. It happens every day all over the planet. So the correction has to be correction in love, but the correction has to hurt enough to get the point across. Now, when your kids are little with diapers on, and you swat that big padded diaper, you know it doesn't hurt them at all. But they will act like they just died. They will scream and the tears will pour and you just crushed them because they know they're being corrected. But it's healthy to do that to young kids. When you say no, your no means no. When you say yes, yes means yes. So when that little toddler comes up and is going to reach up onto the stove and that burner is red hot and you yell no, they stop and you save them from a bad burn, because you have been correcting them. When Josie was little, and I was living in Hudson, we were remodeling the house. I remember there were big windows like this. I had a desk right inside, and one was a door. And she was playing in the front yard where I could watch her. And Joette was off to work. The kids were off to school, and she was right out there. And I told them, you can't go on the street to get a ball. It's a pretty busy street, and cars go pretty quickly down the street. If the ball goes in the street, you come get me and I'll get the ball. And so one day I see her out there playing, the ball rolls out in the street, she runs out in the street and gets it. And I ran out the door and I brought her in the house and I gave her a spanking that she wouldn't forget. I said, don't go out there, a car could run over you, don't you ever do that again. And boy, the tears flowed and it was a really bad day for her. About a month later, I'm in the house, I'm looking out, she's playing, the ball went out in the street. And I saw a car speeding, and it ball went right between the cars, right out in front of that car, and she's sprinting to get the ball. And when she got to the curb, she stopped. And the car went by. She's alive because of the discipline that she got and the lesson she learned. No means no. If you love your children, you will correct them. Look what it says in Proverbs 19:18. Proverbs 19:18. It says, chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. So chasten while there's hope. Let not your soul, it says in other translations, let not your soul spare for his crying. In other words, give him the correction. I mean, my dad was good at this again. He was the corrector, like Mom was when I was little. But once we got a little bigger, Mom could spank us, and she couldn't make us cry if she tried. Get the stick, get the belt, which was dumb, because then she goes, well, when your dad gets home, he's going to correct you. And that did count. You know, she was small and she'd do her best, but, you know, you get a little more stubborn, you get tougher. And then that was stupid, because then when Dad got home, then I really got one, and it sunk in. And I learned quickly, yes, Mom, I'm sorry, and then get it right. But, you know, if Dad said, you're at church and I told you to sit still and be quiet, and then you just wreaked havoc, he would give you the look, and you know what the look meant. And then you got in the car and he goes, when you get home, you know what's coming. And we had a long ways. We had 178 miles to get home from church, so we just prayed Dad would forget, right? I remember praying, God, let Dad forget. But he had this iron trap mind. He never forgot. It's like, it sounded good, everything. The talk was good in the car, everything was normal. And we'd stop, and he goes, you know what to do. Go find me a stick and a switch. And oh, man, he didn't forget. But we learned, right? When God chastens us, our parents chasten us, we learn the lessons, and hopefully we learn from it, and then we start listening, and then everybody around us benefits. I remember many, many times going to restaurants where my mom and dad got complimented. We'd go in with all these kids, and people go, oh no, here comes 5 kids, and it's going to be chaos, and we're at this nice restaurant. But it never turned into chaos, because we didn't want to have to get corrected when we got home, and we learned to behave. And people would come up to the table and say, your children are wonderful, and I know that made Mom and Dad feel really good. They were well pleased when that happened. And some of you have had those kind of compliments as parents, because you discipline and raise your children correctly. It says in Proverbs 13:24, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. So the word discipline, by the way, means to teach. So the effect is to teach, right from wrong, no from yes, and in good behavior. So when you discipline your children, make sure that the rules for that discipline is fair, it's consistent, it's clear. If you run into the street again, you are going to get a spanking like you got last time, maybe even a little harder. Don't do it again, and it works. But it has to be consistent. If I let it go 5 times and then I blow up and correct them, it becomes, now it's in anger, I'm not doing it to teach, it becomes a bigger deal. The punishment has to fit the crime is another important point. Some of the things that our kids do are not that big a deal. I remember one day my boys got up early, we're living in Hudson, and they're out playing tennis on the neighbor's front yard. And I'm like, man, it's 6 a.m, what are they doing playing tennis? And he had just painted his garage door white, and they were hitting tennis balls off of it in the rain, and it was muddy. And every time the ball hit the wall, there were 100 tennis ball marks all over the door in the front of that garage. And so when I got up and I looked at it, I go, what are you thinking? Like, well, Dad, it was paved, and we don't have a driveway yet, and the door is real smooth. Yeah, look at the door. What are you thinking, guys? Like, you're 10. You should know better than this. Get the water hose and clean it. And just then, Joette called breakfast, so we went in, we had breakfast. And after breakfast, you get over there. It's a business next door. It's a house that they run a business out of. And he'll come in Monday and see this. I want that clean. Get the water hose and the soap and the car wash rags and go get it done. We had breakfast, and Monday morning the doorbell rang, and I remember, I bet they didn't wash that door. Sure enough, they forgot. Had breakfast, nobody remembered, and the neighbor had just painted it. And we just moved in. And that didn't go over well. And I said, I'm really, really sorry, but I'll get the boys. We'll be over there today. We'll take soap and water, wash that door. If it's not right, I'll paint it for you again. So we went over. I didn't just wash the door. We washed the whole garage for him. All the siding, got all the green mold off the siding and everything. And he came out and he said, man, thanks. You didn't have to do the whole thing. A week later, Josie's small. It's Mother's Day. She has all these beautiful flowers. Well, she picked the neighbor's flowers and gave them to Mom for Mother's Day. Same neighbor. I'm like, oh, man, now I got to talk to this guy again. Like, I don't even know where to get these flowers. Like, I don't see these at Home Depot. So, sure enough, ding dong, 8 o'clock Monday morning. Oh, man, it's him again. I mean, I could tell you story after story. Ball through the window. I mean, this guy, we just beat his place up, right? But we'd always go fix it. And when we left, he did not want us to move. But we, I didn't beat my children up for breaking a window. I said, I told you not to do it. Guess what? Get your piggy banks. The consequence this time is get your money out. We got to buy a new piece of glass and fix that. They didn't want to do that, but hey, man, I got to get my money and spend it on that. I wanted to spend it on something else. Yeah, well, you didn't listen. Punishment fits the crime. That you want your children to learn their consequences for your actions and let them face the consequences. My dad said, if you go to prison, I'm going to let you stay there. I'm not going to bail you out. You deserved it if you're there. If you didn't deserve it, it's for keeping the Sabbath or something, yeah, I'll get you out if I can. But if you do something wrong, that's where you deserve to be. I'll come visit you, but I'm not bailing you out. You're going to face the consequences of your decisions. And it's good for children to do that and learn to be responsible citizens in the community. Do not accept unacceptable behavior ever. Temper tantrums are unacceptable. Don't ever let it go unchecked. Discipline, by the way, should never include pushing, slapping, kicking, hitting. And I see, little kids that live in horrible situations. Let's move on to the next point. Spend quality time with your children. I've heard it said to help your children turn out right, spend twice as much time and half as much money. Do things together with your kids. And as a family, we've always had like a list of things we want to do. I've always told my kids, make a list of 25 things you want to do in your life. And some of the things you put on that list, have a list for some spiritual goals you have, but just things you want to do, things you want to accomplish. And it might be something like I want to climb a mountain someday. I want to get to the top of a 14,000-foot mountain. Maybe it's skydiving. Maybe it's learning to scuba dive. Maybe it's one day I'm going to go ice fishing. Whatever. These are exciting things, and some of them are more costly than others, and so you have to maybe prioritize and say we can't afford that, but we can afford this. Let's go do that. And let them do some exciting things. And I find when I have a list, I start checking the list off. Sometimes I add more on the list, but I've done those things now. And life is more exciting when you have goals and you have things you want to accomplish. And as a family, we had a list of 25 things we wanted to experience as a family, and we have checked about 3 more to go on the list. Most of those off. And we have stories and pictures to tell. We rode camels in Dubai. Like, that's a crazy thing, but we did it. We were coming back from South Africa. We stopped in Dubai for the night, and we rode a camel. Like, that was pretty cool. We went sand surfing, right, in the sand dunes. Like, wow, that was pretty fun. It's really hot. Not as fun as snow, but we did it. So, you have stories to tell, you have pictures to put on the wall of the family, you have some exciting things, and some of the things are literally free. Seeing national parks, going on a hike, and we're going to go to the Tetons and hike someday. It's awesome. Young people need activity. They're full of energy, and so it's your responsibility as a parent to direct that energy. And if you don't provide activities for the family, and if we don't provide activities as a church for our kids, they're going to go elsewhere to find them. And that's not something we want. We want to keep our kids in the church. We want to keep our kids here. And, that's why we have summer camp. It's only 2 weeks, and I can't do what a parent does. That's their job. But we can support the parents. We can make camp great. We can let them meet other friends in the church so that they can stay in touch throughout the year. Maybe phone call or text or, through social media. They stay in touch, and that's how they get through the rest of the year. Coming up to, they get to see them again at the feast. Or maybe it's another time they have an opportunity to get together. Children need to know they don't have to do the wrong things to have fun. When you break the law or you do things that you shouldn't do, it might even be fun at the time. Sometimes we ignore that. If you have sex outside of marriage, it might be fun at the time. Might be enjoyable, but the consequences will be heavy. In the world today, there are lots of venereal diseases out there, sexually transmitted diseases, I should say, that you can pick up just one time. You do something stupid and you pay a consequence. Young women might get pregnant. You go, look, it's tempting. Sinning is tempting. It might be exciting, but the consequences are devastating. And why go that path? You don't have to learn the hard way. Sometimes we do, but you don't have to. Just don't do it. Christ never sinned. Did he live a boring, dull life? No way. He said that I came that you might have life and you might have it more abundantly. And I've always told the kids, look, if you do something and it's fun today and it's fun tomorrow and it's fun the next day, that's the right kind of thing to do. That's the right kind of fun. And there's a lot of exciting and challenging things that they can do, and that we can, provide opportunities for them to do. Number 6, teach your children how to work. In Proverbs 6, we see the scriptures tell us, to go to the ant, right? Go to the ant, you sluggard, Proverbs 6:6. And it talks about, laziness and being lazy and how God has no respect for that. And then we see, let's go to 2 Thessalonians 3. 2 Thessalonians 3, verse 10. And verse 11, it says, "For even when we were with you," and Paul's writing to this church in Thessalonica, "for even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if someone will not work, neither shall he eat." Man, that's a really good policy. Even in the Bible, here's a widow, right? Did people just bring her the food and deliver it to her doorstep? No, she had to go glean the fields. If you're able to work, go work, God says. If you're not able to work, that's different. We have third tithe for that. We have other, people in the church that will help you. They're happy to help you when you can't do it. But if you're able to do it, go do it. What you're able to do, go do. There's always something you can do. I see in my neighborhood, mentally handicapped people ride the bus in and they move carts for 8 hours, like get the carts from the parking lot and put them up by the store. I have great respect for those people. I'm like, look, you're out here contributing to society. You're not a drain on it. You're doing something. Way to go. We live in a society where everybody's entitled to everything. Well, in God's kingdom, you won't be entitled to everything. You'll find out real quick you're not entitled. If you can work, get your butt out of bed and go to work. And our children need to be taught the value of work ethic. And Paul said, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. Again, this applies for those who are unwilling to work, not those who are unable to work. Verse 11, "For we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies." So Paul, what he's addressing here is a problem in the church during his day, and I can tell you we have that problem in the church yet today. And he points out that idleness, right, breeds sin. Those who are disorderly, not working at all, become busybodies, and they cause trouble and division in the church when they ought to be being productive. Go pull your weight, man, do your share. Are we willing to provide for our families as parents? And are we doing that well? And, if we are, and we're leading by our example, hopefully our children will do the same. Provide for their children and their wives and their families. And when we get to Titus and Timothy and we look at qualifications for deacons and elders, it's interesting that one of the qualifications that God throws in there is that you're able to rule your house well. Right? That you've got that under subjection, and that you've taught your children well, and that they're contributing to the church and the family and society. You know, God will do for us what we can't do for ourselves, but he expects us to do what we can. And in teaching your children to work, you should require your children to do their share of the household chores. That's something every family can do. And I know growing up, one of us, cleared the table and washed the table and brought the dishes to the kitchen. Somebody else swept the floor, and somebody had to wash, somebody had to dry. Like, everybody had a job, and we rotated through that. But we pitched in. Our parents didn't come and clean our rooms. They came to check our room and see if it was clean, and they made us clean the room. And even little kids, you can teach them, we're going to put all the toys back together now. We're going to go put them in the tubs, and they can help pick their mess back up. Sometimes at camp, I see people that I can tell they have not been taught that at home. Everything about it's messy. So I inspect dorms, or have dorm inspectors go and inspect dorms every day. Because otherwise it's total chaos and a disaster. There's trash all over, and the beds aren't made. And I'm like, look, that's not what we're going to do here, okay? We're going to make our bed every day. We're going to clean that dorm. We're going to inspect that dorm. And if you've got the best dorm all day, every day this week, you get the highest score, you get a free popsicle. And you won't believe how hard they work for that popsicle. It cost me nothing, but we had the cleanest dorm. We got the popsicle. Like, it means something. And I've had kids go home from camp and their parents go, what did you do? They're different. Their room's clean. They're making their bed. Well, it's a pretty simple thing. You should have done that already, but you didn't, so I'm glad that we're able to help a little bit. As far as work goes, when your children are little especially, let them help you even if it slows you down. I'll give you an example. When I washed the car when the kids were little, it'd take me 4 times as long because I just rinse that side and you're putting soap back on it, right? Like, that's what they do. But they feel like they're involved, and they're helping Dad wash the car. And what you do at a certain point, you go, thank you so much. Now you guys go in and dry off, and then you give it a quick rinse and chamois it down, and you're good. But they're contributing. They feel like they're part of it. I've always, my kids know how to mow the yard. There's a lot of kids grow up and they don't even know how to start the mower. Or where does the gas go? These have oil in them? Yeah. Like, they don't know. They've never been taught. Your girls should be able to mow the yard and change a tire if it gets flat. And the boys should know, look, your clothes go in the washer, and don't put that, bright red shirt that you just bought in with your nice white church shirt, because it'll now be pink. And we all do that. I've done it myself. When you go to college, I'm fast. I throw them all in there, and all my white stuff came out pink, and I'm not wearing that. Now I got to go work harder and buy more white stuff. But you see the point. They got to learn how to do laundry. Simple things. Can they cook anything at all? The boys even know how to grill steaks. I haven't grilled steaks in a long time. Jake, Casey, go, and they've got it down to a science. But all these things are learning to work. Work can be fun. It should be fun. 2 other things on work. Teach your children the value of hard work. Teach them how to work hard. Sweat, work hard, dig a hole. Sometimes you make a challenge out of it. The young men do. It's like who can carry the most or do the most. Hard work's important. And also teach your children to do things excellently. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. Don't do it halfway. Nothing. My kids sometimes get annoyed with me and my wife because if I'm putting the silverware away in a drawer, I line it up. If I'm going to put the silverware away, it takes me this much longer to line it all up and get it right. If my kids were young and they stacked a wood pile and it looks like it's going to fall over, I'd make them restack the whole pile, do it right. I want a nice wood pile. That might sit here for a month. I want it looking good. People say, who cares, a wood pile? But you see, you're learning the value of doing things well, excellently. Quality. And then when you get on a job, you don't cut corners, and your boss goes, man, that guy's different, or that girl's different than the other employees. They're on time. They're well groomed. They don't cut corners. They don't try to sneak out early. And they do what they do well, even if it's sweeping a floor, right? Sweep the floor like Michelangelo painted. Make the floor the best, cleanest floor you can make it. And if you learn to do things like that, and then there's another verse that I love. It's Colossians 3. Let's go there. Colossians 3:23. That fits in with working. It says, whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. So if you're washing windows, do it heartily. Do it like you're doing the windows for God. And if you think that way and you work that way, you will be set apart from the crowd and you'll be a light to the world. And your children will if you teach that. Number 7, teach your children to respect authority. We live in a society where there's very little respect for authority anymore. You know, we see rioting, we see cops getting spit at, things thrown at them. I would like to see everybody who does that arrested immediately and go to prison to put an end to that. It should not happen. And a lot of times it's young college-age kids and others, young adults doing it. No respect for authority. And we're living in a country now where less and less people want to be in law enforcement because of the state of things and how they're unable to really even do their jobs. Their hands are tied. But, you know, in the Bible, God tells children to honor and respect their parents, right? It's a commandment. And frankly, it's a commandment with promise. God said there's a promise attached to that. I didn't have that in the notes, but the Bible makes it very, very plain to us in the writings of Paul that this is a commandment with promise. I believe it's in Galatians. Let me take a quick look here. Is it Galatians or Ephesians? But anyway, I'll find it here shortly. Ephesians 6, yeah. I knew it was Galatians 6 or Ephesians 6. It says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. Notice, with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. So when I had stage 4 cancer, one of my prayers to God was, God, I've honored my parents. You promised me long life. I'm claiming the promise. And I felt confident in doing that. I came boldly before God, claiming this commandment with a promise attached. And I know that it's part of the reason I'm still alive today and I haven't gotten cancer back. If you want to live long, you want things to go well, young people, obey and honor and respect your parents. And when you learn to do that, you'll start having respect for all authority. You know, it says in Isaiah chapter 3, verse 4, now here's a prophecy, and notice what it says. Isaiah chapter 3, verse 4. It says, I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. The people will be oppressed, everyone by another, and everyone by his neighbor. The child will be insolent toward the elder, and base toward the honorable. Now, because the leadership was so poor in Judah, right? And godly leaders were nowhere to be found. They were replaced by children and babes, which really is young, inexperienced, incompetent leaders. We see that in nations and in countries today. Unqualified leaders in positions of authority. And for everyone to be oppressed by another describes really a state of anarchy. It's an upside down world. And that's where we're at. And it should not be that way in the Church of God. And we have to really work hard to respect authority, to teach respect for authority. Without respect for authority, a child really cannot be taught properly. They won't listen, and therefore they cannot learn. So we got to start early teaching our children to respect parents, respect their teachers, respect people, adults at church. You know, I love it when I hear a young man or a young woman show respect for older people. You know, no, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, When I see that, I automatically say that this kid has character. This kid gets it. They're not disrespectful. They've been taught well. They've learned well. And that's going to help them on any job they ever get. Get a respectful young man or woman that comes to work. People go, wow, you're exceptional. I don't see this much anymore today, but hopefully in the church it's the norm. Number 8, guide your children in the selection of their friends. Guide your children in the selection of their friends. Look at Proverbs 12:26. I think you can see the obvious reason for this, but Proverbs 12:26. Says, the righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, evil company corrupts good habits. Evil company corrupts good habits. So as a parent, you want to get to know your children's friends, and you also want to teach them how to select the right kind of friends. And sometimes they make a bad choice. I'll use my daughter Josie for another example. She had a couple friends. They would occasionally, I'd take them to the mall, let them shop for a period of time, and then pick her up. And one day her friends were wanting to shoplift, and they went into a shop and they stole some makeup, and they went into a change room and they were filling their bags with it. And Josie's in pretty good shape, and she's like, you're not getting out of here unless you put that makeup back. I'm not letting you. I'll tackle you. Like, you're not going to steal, not with me. And if you try, I'm going to make a lot of noise too, and they're going to arrest you. So her friends put it back and they left, and then she called me and asked to be picked up, and I'm like, I just dropped you off. Like, what's up? I'll talk later. I'm like, in the car, I'm there fast. Something's up. And she told me what happened. She goes, Dad, I just can't hang around those people anymore. I said, exactly. You're going to end up in jail with them. Even if you hadn't caught that, they got shoplifting charges. You were with them. You can see where that goes. She goes, I know. I thought they were better than that. I'm not going to hang out with them. I'll say hi to them at school. I might have lunch in the cafeteria, but I'm not going anywhere with them anymore. I go, exactly. You learned that. I didn't even have to tell you that. You figured it out. So they have to analyze the behavior of others and the end result of that behavior and say, look, can I hang around this person or not? And sometimes the answer is, this can't be my friend. I can't, I say hi and bye and be polite, but I can't spend time with them. And that can make a big difference. We see an accomplice to the crime ends up in a bad spot. Number 9, very important, encourage your children. Some of us as parents get really good at correcting, and we never say anything positive. It's always negative, negative, negative. And a wife can be that way in a marriage. A husband can get that way in a marriage. And it's correct, correct, correct. Never encourage. We used to, when we were teaching and coaching, said spend at least 3 times more praising your students than criticizing them. And really, that's a good policy. You should spend more time saying, hey, I am really pleased with what you did there. I saw what happened. I saw that, this elderly person came in and was struggling. You ran over there and helped him up the stairs. You didn't have to do that, but I noticed that. Or I noticed, or I heard that you actually sent a card to this lady who was sick, and she told me the Sabbath, and you did that a month ago, and it really made a difference for her. I really appreciate that. Way to go. You make me smile as a parent when you do stuff like that. You know what? They send more cards, right? They go, oh, good, Dad likes it, Mom likes it. It encourages and promotes that good behavior. And it's the same thing when you're coaching. You got a kid, you're teaching a layup, and they're uncoordinated. If you just keep correcting them, they'll never learn to do a layup. You get them to dribble with the right hand, you go, hey, way to go, you dribbled with the right hand. Yeah, you didn't even leave the ground right, you left off the wrong leg. I don't bring that up. At least you're dribbling with the correct hand, and you got that right. Now let's try to take off with the right foot. Pretty soon the ball's nowhere near the basket, but hey, you left off the correct foot. Way to go. Pretty soon they're making a layup. But, if they're climbing, rock climbing. I used to run rock climbing at Orr years ago, and you can't yell at kids to get up a mountain. You got to encourage them, motivate them. You can do it. It's 3 more inches. Come on, you can reach it. They're scared. They got it. You got it. You got it. Now you can get up. The motivating, the encouraging works much better. And with your own children, Again, I think we fall into a trap as parents and as humans where we're harder on people closest to us, and we don't give enough encouragement and praise. And so we, as adults, we respond really well to positive encouragement as well. If you have a boss who's just constantly negative and depressing, you don't really feel like working for that person. But you got somebody who appreciates you and gives you a little bit of wiggle room. Hey, I need this day off. It's a holy day. You know what? You're a hard worker. Take it. We want to encourage and help our children just like we would our employees if we're running a business. Proverbs 15:23 is a verse you can throw into that point. It says, "A man has joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is." All right, number 10, listen to your children. Proverbs 18:13. Listen to your children. It says, "He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him." Even if you're going to correct your children, they're both involved, hear it out. Hear their side of the story, hear their side of the story. That one's usually wrong 9 out of 10 times, but this is the 10th time, and they're not wrong, and don't correct them. Hear it out, right? Listen. As a minister, there's no way I can correct someone if there's an altercation in a relationship until I hear both sides of the story. And I weigh it, and I pray about God give me discernment and help me to give good advice, but it would be foolish of me to listen to one and not hear the other side. God says that's folly and shame to the one who operates that way. But listening to your children, give your children an opportunity to participate in family decision making. Their insight will surprise you, especially as they get older. It's like, wow, that's a great idea. I never thought of that. I've always learned, and I was taught this, keep the door open in your office. It's really easy to shut it and shut out all the noise and the disturbance, but I've always kept it open. So the kids, if they wanted to come in, they felt like Dad's not keeping me out. When I coached, I always left my door open, so I didn't seem imposing. They're walking by, they want to talk to me, but if the door's shut, they just keep going, door's shut, I'm not going to do it. Door's open, they might even hesitate, and they walk by and I call them back. Hey, come back. I know she hesitated there. Come on back. What's up? And now we have the discussion that we need to have. And listen. I find when I'm dealing with problems, I have to listen more than I talk. And we have to learn to do that even with our children. We have to keep the doors of communication open. We, as a family, have always tried to sit down for at least one meal together every day. We haven't done it perfectly. There's times it can't work, but mainly we do that. And for us, it's usually dinner. Even if we're busy, we'll take 15 minutes and have dinner together, but at least we try to get everybody together at the same time in the same room and shut the phones off and the technology off, and we only have 15 minutes, but let's talk and let's eat. Number 11, just a couple more points here. And this one, I think will be important. It's kind of a physical matter, but as a family, you should be prepared for disasters. Some of you work as EMTs, and that's what you're trained in, right? Dealing with disaster and problems, injuries. When I did adventure trips, would always get certified in backcountry wilderness first aid training so that if something happened, I knew how to deal with it. As a teacher or a coach, you're always having to get CPR, and if you're in a pool, you have to get your lifeguarding certification. But you know how to deal with problems. As a family, you have to be prepared for disasters, because James 2:14 gives a principle that would apply here. It says, what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? So when you're in a tough spot, God always expects you to do what you can do, and he'll take care of the rest. So as a family, I remember we lived in a farmhouse in North Dakota when I was little. It had a really narrow stairs, and God, gave us this beautiful 365-acre farm we took over from my grandfather. But it was an old farmhouse with a really steep, narrow stairs. And we had a coal-burning fireplace. It was a big metal grate on the first floor and second floor, and the heat would just go up the metal grate and spread out into the house. I remember in the winter, the ice would get like an inch thick on the inside of the windows just because, it didn't have proper heat and air, but it kept us warm enough to sleep at night. But that grill sometimes would get red hot, and there's always a chance of sparks and a fire. And so Dad would say, look, you're on the second floor. Mom and Dad, we're on the first floor. If there's a fire and you can't get down the stairways, how are you going to get out of this house? And I remember my brother said, would you jump out onto that tree? He goes, that tree's like 20 feet out there. You're not going to make it. Okay, you're going to get hurt. And you're up a couple stories and you're little. What else could you do? So, I'm going to break the window out. Now you've just cut your hand really bad, and now we got another big problem. Use a chair, throw it through the window. So Dad would tell us, here's what you do if there's a fire. We had a plan. We'd take the sheets, tie them to the post of the bed, slide it over to the door, and climb down, out the broken window. So he had a plan. I've always had plans for my family. Like, look, if we had lived in California, we have a major earthquake, and you're here and I'm there, how do we find each other? Like, where are we going to meet? Do we have a plan for that? Let's look for the epicenter, and let's go north of that. The safest place we can get to north of that. That's where we're going to meet. We got a plan. If we're hiking in the woods, I always tell people, if you get lost, what are we going to do? What's your plan? Do you know how to signal for, SOS? Do you know how to do that? If your boat flips over, or your canoe, do you know how to upright it, right? Do you know how to save yourself, do a rescue? All these kind of things might save the lives of your children or the lives of others. Be prepared for disasters. Discuss it as a family. Have a plan. God will do what you can't do, but you got to have, a plan. If you're hiking and you get lost, simply distress signals for hikers are 3s. 3 shots of a rifle if you're hunting, 3 shouts if you don't have anything, 3 blasts of a whistle. If you're hiking or you're out hunting and you hear that, somebody's in trouble. I'm going to try to go to where that sound is and help them. But if you're never taught that and you have no game plan, people die. If you're shopping in a crowded store and you get separated from your little children, do they know what to do? I always taught my children what to do. Look for the person with the apron, or go where the people are checking out and tell somebody you're lost. They'll get on the intercom and call me. Don't just wander out in the parking lot trying to find the car and get lost even more, and then somebody snags you. Let's think about this. So again, have a plan. You've heard the saying that luck favors those who are prepared. Right? It's no coincidence. A simple plan can save a life. And then finally, number 12, pray to God for help. Proverbs 3:6 says, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. The Bible, again, gives us rules that we need to follow to ensure success. We have to pray, and we have to search the scriptures to find answers that we seek in raising our children or in any other area of life. And anytime that you and I deal with kids, whether they're our own or whether we're working at camp or we're caring for others' kids, we need to be close to God if we're going to have success. If I have counselors at camp, we're praying every day. You pray that God helps you do that job well. We need you to do your jobs well. We're going to pray for you and for the kids. As a parent, pray to God. God, help me do my job well. I've got some problems now with my son or my daughter, and I don't know exactly how to talk to them or how to fix this, but help me and guide me. And as a parent, I'll just add this. If you make a mistake, let's say you overcorrect, you yell, or you say something you shouldn't, apologize. I know they're kids, but apologize. You made a mistake. You got angry and you shouldn't have. You said something you shouldn't have. You did something you shouldn't have. Tell your son or your daughter or your dorm, look, I overstepped. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen again. People respect that. And they realize that, look, you got it. I'm not worried about this person anymore. I don't feel afraid of them because they're willing to admit they were wrong. Even though they yelled at me, they realized they crossed the line. And I did that because I care, but I didn't do it right. I'm sorry. I'll try to do better next time. And that goes a long ways with your own children. in building a relationship with them. Our children should be outstanding among young people on the planet. We can raise them correctly because we know how. We have the Bible that shows us the path. It's outlined for us. Our children can be beacons to everyone around them and lights in a very dark world. So we must start now rearing our children the right way because that's our God-given responsibility.
For more information, go to our website at cogassembly.org. Copyright 2020, Church of God Assembly. All rights reserved.